Hello and welcome to the case study on enabling circular systems. Right now, $500 billion in value is lost each year because used clothing is not properly repurposed, recycled, or resold. This is largely the result of the fashion industry's linear model, where used garments are not recycled back into the system, but raw materials are used and discarded in a way that's not sustainable. The flip side of this linear model is what's called circularity, where used garments are not thrown away, but rather repurposed into raw materials that can be used to create new products in a circular system. No doubt there are many challenges to creating a circular system for the fashion industry, and those are documented in many places. But today we're going to talk about solutions. And specifically, we're going to talk about how technology can help enable circular systems in fashion, and specifically through the lens of design. And to do that, we're going to talk through a collaboration between the emerging contemporary brand Ahluwalia and the material sciences company Avery Dennison. We have 30 minutes for this exploration. If you're viewing live, please add comments and questions in the chat box, and know that this will be recorded and you can view at a further time on the Global Fashion Agenda website. My name is Travis Peoples. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Global Fashion Agenda, and I'll be the point guard for this session, distributing the conversation. But more importantly, I'm joined by two distinguished guests, Priya Ahluwalia, the Creative Director and founder of her emerging namesake brand, and Michael Colarossi, the Vice President of Innovation and Sustainability at Avery Dennison Apparel Solutions. Thank you both very much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now, you two embarked on a collaboration together to create a more sustainable garment using technology. But before we talk about what you created and the journey to get there, I want to start with you, Priya. So you have a very exciting young brand. You already have many accolades under your belt that are enviable, and I'm sure that comes with a lot of new opportunities. So why did you say yes to this challenge and this opportunity?
I've always found sustainability and fabrics really important and fundamental to how I work with the brand. And I think that I couldn't say no to this challenge, because what I found as an emerging designer is that it's quite hard to get to access these technologies and processes that are happening on bigger scales. And so, Avery Dennison sort of supplies to such a big scale of the industry, and they have, technologies that I just don't normally have access to. So I couldn't turn down an opportunity to kind of get to know them and also, learn from them. I think it was a two-way learning thing.
Sure. And is sustainability something that you've worked with often in the past? Is it tied to your history of the brand or yourself, or is this a totally new venture for you?
No, so the brand is really, I guess, rooted in sustainability. And when I first launched, a lot of it comes from my heritage. I'm Indian and Nigerian, and I think that sustainable practices are really sort of drummed into you from a young age in those types of backgrounds, whether that's about like repurposing Tupperware. If you want to get ice cream out of the freezer, it's rarely actually ice cream. It's normally like, a big tub of rice or something. So all those simple, nuanced ways that I've been used to it. But then also, I've done a lot of research into what happens to clothing after we give it to charity or we throw it away. And I've been to Panipat in India, which is the global capital of recycling garments in the world. And I was sort of really blown away by it. So that kind of was the foundation for me doing the label and moving forward. So it's been something that's been in the foundations of the brand.
Amazing. Mike, I want to turn to you for this setup as well. So Avery Dennison and the work that you do, you look at the entire value chain related to technology and sustainability. Even with that entire sort of value chain approach, what made this sort of collaboration focused on design and circularity? What made that interesting for you?
Yeah, I think I'm laughing. I rarely get asked about design as sort of the technical sort of nerd behind some of our technologies. I never really expect to get asked about design. So you've made my day and my week. So thanks, Travis. I think for us as an organization, and for me personally, the really interesting thing about the nexus of design and circularity is that point of creation is where circularity really happens. It's been amazing to think and to listen to all the great speakers that the CFS Plus has put on stage and in front of all of us over the last day and a half or so. But for me, this idea of bringing designers together and with individuals and with companies at a point of creation, that's really where the magic happens in terms of starting that circular journey. And I think that is the point when you're making decisions on materials, you're making decisions on how you want to engage with your consumer. And all of those individual decisions really dictate how easy or how difficult the rest of that circular supply chain is going to be. And very honestly, I think we as an industry are underestimating the importance of designers in the circular economy and creating circular models. Designers play a critical role in making certain that consumers find circularity easy. It's easier for them to digest. It's easier for them to figure out, with all the myriad of options that they have, how they can engage. And I really think for us as Avery Dennison, finding ways of working with designers, incorporating technology to really simplify and demystify circularity is what's really, really interesting for us.
It's an interesting point about design as part of this broader circularity ecosystem. Priya, do you feel a special responsibility to sustainability as a designer, or do you feel like everyone should feel the same responsibility in the fashion value chain?
I definitely feel like everyone has a responsibility, and although it's something that I think all of us at Ahluwalia are really dedicated to, I definitely think that there's larger powers that are maybe emerging brands that have more of a responsibility, whether that's, you know, huge high street or online businesses that have the capacity to literally change economies of scale. You know, if the big, don't want to say any names, but if the big players, you know, started choosing organic cotton over normal cotton, for example, that that cost per unit will go down for everyone. And those are the kind of big people that I think can affect real change in terms of like economics and accessibility. But I do think that it's, you know, young designers with like vigor and energy, I guess, and also the designs that are agile. We don't have, like, you know, brands like my size and others, we don't have loads of chains of hierarchy and there's hardly any bureaucracy because we can just kind of do what we want. So we're more agile in kind of experimentation and playing around with different ideas. And I think that that's how the young brands will always lead, I guess, lead from the front, but then we need the bigger players to come on board and really like support with the, you know, essentially the logistics, the funds and the people power.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Now, so we've set the foundation here. I want to talk about the product that you created and the process that you went through. Maybe Priya, you can start with just speaking a little bit about the outcome of this collaboration, about the product and what went into it. Yeah,
so for the project, we worked, it was run alongside my new SS21 collection called Liberation. And what we wanted to try and do with the challenge is show how you could make a garment circular. So we used I'm calling it our technology now, Avery Dennison's label technology with QR codes to basically showcase how that technology would allow, you know, a customer or anyone that's interested in sort of like looking at this garment, what's happened to make it in the past, what, you know, how to care for it in the present, and what can happen in the future. So we designed a jumper, and it's a crew neck jumper made from like recycled jerseys. And as everything in my brand is quite graphic and it's got like patchwork and different stitching. So we tracked that bit, you know, showed every bit where we got all the materials from, how they were assembled. And yeah, I think it's quite exciting. And then it shows, you know, in the future, ideally how we would like to have a take back scheme.
Now, this is a case study, and for those in school or have gone through case studies in school, you know that it's not a straight path to get from inspiration to a final product. Were there any unique challenges or hiccups along the way to getting to this jumper that you created?
I mean, I guess there was a few. There was definitely, COVID didn't help because obviously, I mean, we were meant to be doing this physically. So I think that led to us having to kind of really pivot how we were going to present this, and it's kind of changed the project as a whole. And I think also, if I'm being honest, I think there was a little bit of it was a bit difficult to figure out how to show that the technology and the communication of what it does works for Ahluwalia as a brand. To show that Avery Dennison technology works for individual brands, but it would work differently for each brand depending on their, the brand's sort of design and focus and brand integrity or whatever. But I think we did a really good job to show, that technological side, but also how it works for our brand specifically.
Same question for you, Mike. Any unique challenges from point A to finished product?
Yeah, I would say that there were probably two primary challenges. I think Priya is being a little bit modest, and let's be honest, Ahluwalia is a hot brand right now, and it's growing incredibly quickly, and it's getting a lot of coverage in the industry. So very honestly, just figuring out schedules between a very large organization and someone who's in incredible demand is always a challenge. And then I think secondly, and I think it probably relates to something we'll be talking about a little bit more in terms of collaboration, there is just the reality of a small organization who may be more agile, maybe more nimble, like an Ahluwalia, working with a very large multinational that is very much process oriented, great at driving scale, great at driving efficiency, and finding ways to work together and for Ahluwalia to challenge our thinking and for Priya to challenge our thinking. I think that's always a interesting sort of dynamic and possibly even a point of tension sometimes. But I think it's good. It's a creative and positive tension.
Yeah.
And Mike, how often do you find yourself working with brands of Priya and Ahluwalia's scale? Is that something that you're leaning more into, or has it always been part of the roadmap?
It's always been part of our ethos as an organization, in that we certainly work with a number of smaller, more nimble, more agile brands, very much because we find, as Priya was mentioning earlier, they're just able to take bigger risks. They're more willing. And actually it helps us test and iterate and bring new innovations into the market and figure out, does this technology work? Or does this go-to-market strategy work? So we actually have an entire organization and team that's focused on working with smaller brands. And it helps us. It helps us on one hand to really think differently, but it also really challenges us to get faster, to get more innovative, to then ultimately challenge the broader industry to drive significant change.
So I've heard from both of you this notion of agility, of Ahluwalia being an emerging brand that has a little bit more space to grow and to flex. Priya, did this process force you to interrupt like your normal design or creation approach, or was this seamless and woven into just how you normally operate?
To be honest, I think it was a little bit of both actually, because I just still, we still went around the design process the way we normally do. I think it was more a case of thinking about that we wanted to communicate the design process to, the wider audience, and I wanted it to be communicated in a way that was like fun and, enjoyable to look at. I think a lot of times about sustainability, we forget that like product still needs to be desirable. People, there's nothing as unsustainable as a jumper that no one wants to buy. That's just the worst thing you can do. So I think that like we were really keen that we wanted to make it visually interesting and engaging the way we recorded the design process. So I'd say that was like the main difference. Like that was the main difference, just recording it in a way that was for public consumption. Because I guess generally like that's just, when we design stuff, that's just in-house and it's internal in usage. And it wasn't, you don't normally think about like, what does, people around the world think about how we're doing this. So that was the main thing. But in terms of like the actual design, I still just did what I wanted.
Makes sense. On that note, Priya, you've mentioned previously that sustainability is sort of woven into what the brand DNA is and also your personal background. Can you talk about, if there's a designer listening now that hasn't had that same sort of grounding in these concepts, like where would you point them to for information or to start their journey?
Okay, that's a big question. I mean, I think that there's the one thing to do is definitely just to look out for other designers that are, you know, interested in sustainable practices. In London, you've got people like Phoebe English, for example, or there's Bethany Williams. There's always like nice ways to look through like designer point of view. And then I guess, to be honest, like to say if there's like one hub of sustainability focused information, I guess I haven't found that. I think if you look at a lot of the stuff that's on the agenda this weekend, you'll see loads of stuff. So I think a good thing to do would be to look at the schedule of what's happening this week, over this event, and kind of like follow those, you know, players and people that are participating in it, because we've all got this common agenda, I guess. Think making fashion more sustainable. And then I guess it's just about thinking you can't do it all. There's so many areas of sustainability within clothing. There's, you know, waste focus, there's, you know, biodiversity focus, there's technology, it's all the different areas. And I think that you just have to kind of start with what resonates to you. But I'd also say to consider them sustainable ideas and values within every area of your practice. So, you know, who are you collaborating with, or who are you working with internally, or what is your studio like, or whatever that is, you know, try and manifest that into everything you do across the brand.
Yeah, Travis, if I can add there, I would say that in addition to everything that Priya was saying, if you're passionate about sustainability, if you're passionate about sustainable design, ask. I think what's really interesting about our industry is, particularly in this area of sustainability or circularity, it's a fairly close-knit network, and people are willing to help each other. So if you have the courage to ask for help or to seek some advice, I can almost guarantee you someone within the network, whether it's through GFA or whether it's through just your own personal connections, there will be people who are going to be willing to have conversations with you and help you navigate your way.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Priya.
Yeah, I agree. And sorry, just as we were just speaking then, actually really good resource I think is great is Fashion Revolution. I know Ursula, who's like one of the founders of Fashion Revolution, and I think that what they do is like so good because their information is digestible and it's really clear. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, especially when you're first trying to figure out, you know, because sometimes you want to do something and then another person tells you, no, that's not sustainable, you know, like there's always debates about cotton, for example. 1 week it's okay, 1 week it's not. And so I feel like with Fashion Revolution, it's a really good place and a resource that we can like look at it and digest it rather than being, you know, overloaded with information, which sometimes can be off-putting and make people nervous. And I definitely think, yeah, having a passion for it and trying to view it as a design problem to solve, not a design problem to be scared of. I actually find it makes the design process more fun.
That's really well said. Mike, I want to come back to a point that you were mentioning just on asking, you know, finding someone in your network or nearby to ask. One of my favorite quotes from William Gibson is, you know, that the future is already here. It's just not very evenly distributed. So, you know, how do we better democratize technology so that people either know where to ask, or if they do ask, that it's easier for them to access what the answer is going to be or the direction that someone's pointed in?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question a little bit and was laughing. I don't know what's more democratic than putting technology into something as small as a label and making it accessible to everyone. So I think in some ways we're largely there. With that said, and Priya mentioned it, it's sometimes hard for designers to find that point of access. So I think companies like Avery Dennison have a role to play in educating the industry and taking some of the fear out of the word technology. There's so many different choices to designers when it comes to technology right now. And I think it's difficult in a number of ways for a designer to determine, one, what technology should I be using for this application? Two, how do I incorporate it in a way that is not obtrusive to my brand, still stays with on brand? Is that even possible? And three, then what are the use cases that I can unlock with the use of technology? So I think that's, the industry has a role to play. And then I think the other thing that we're watching very closely that may end up happening is the legislative space. I mean, there's regulations being proposed all around the world right now that could dramatically change the transparency of the apparel industry. And if that happens, and I'm a believer that at some point it will, the only way that you're going to be able to address that is through digital or some level of technology. Because otherwise we're all going to be walking around with labels that are the size of, Tolstoy's War and Peace on our garment. And while it's a lovely read, I don't think anyone wants that hanging off their clothes. So I think there's a piece of legislation is going to end up playing a part, and may actually be what ultimately sort of sets the standard.
On that note, as we're talking about technology in this space, Priya, did you feel intimidated at all by having to integrate technology into your space, or did it feel seamless?
At the beginning, it was kind of, yeah, I'm a really analog person, I think, by nature. I like doing things like by hand, and I think that I'm not the most computer savvy person. I'm trying, but I'm not. But I feel like I got used to it because just in June Fashion Week for London, I was meant to be launching a book physically at an exhibition called Jalebi, and because of COVID and social distancing, we launched it digitally. So we created a 3D VR virtual reality exhibition, which is available to see on my website. And so that I went through that process in like loads of detail in a very short amount of time, because it was like a very, quick turnaround from when we decided to do it. It kind of got me used to it, and then I guess it got me even more excited for this project, because like we've been talking about democratizing technology. I found that like allowing things like we're talking now on this, like we're live streaming now, but I guess anyone that signs up can come and see it. It means that anyone that wants to is interested in these resources, whether they want to see my exhibition or they want to listen to this talk, they can see it, and they can be in Australia, they can be in Japan, they can be wherever in the world. And I actually think that was really exciting for me. And so I kind of felt much less scared by the technology, and probably more encouraged by, the great things it can do. Because I think technology can be a bit scary, like iPhones listening to us all the time and all that kind of stuff. But apart from that, it can do some great things as well, which is good.
Totally. That's why we're here, right?
Yeah.
Mike, on that point, one of the first things we talked about in this session was, Avery Dennison has a view across the work that you do across the entire value chain. So as we talk about this design space, or that design part of the process, aside from maybe some, uncertainty around technology, as Priya just mentioned, if she hadn't gone through the process with the 3D and that approach, are there other things, designers in particular, that you find you have to help them with integrating things like this into their process?
I think the technology piece, of course, and is one. I think this idea of what the technology can enable, though, and thinking that through, what are the different use cases? And we believe that ultimately every piece of apparel, frankly, every piece of consumable item that a human consumes at some point, will ultimately be born with a unique digital ID. And what that allows you to do is to create very unique experiences for your consumer. But it is such a big area of exploration that it's often difficult for an individual designer, an individual brand, whether they are large or small, I'll be honest, to think through what are all the different opportunities along that supply chain. And so a lot of the work that we're doing right now in the space is identifying lighthouses or key projects that are going to point out some of the big use cases, whether that's something like telling a consumer what the care and content instructions are of their garment in a digital way, or allowing them to quickly resell a garment because they now can scan a label and they understand how I can resell this, or further into the supply chain, telling a recycler what the content of that garment is. So that helps them enable the recycling of it. All that can be accomplished with a very unique digital ID, and the technology exists today to do it. It's a matter of helping the designer and then helping the rest of the supply chain understand that it can happen, and then understand what are the changes that have to occur to enable it.
Makes sense. We have just a few minutes left for this case study, and I've got several questions from the audience, but one jumps out for you, Priya, which is a question asking, how is the upcycling design process at Ahluwalia different from a conventional one?
Good question. I don't want to give you away too many of my secrets because it's not very competitive, but I guess we really focus on the project being design led. So sometimes when sourcing things, I know exactly, I know, for example, for autumn winter 20, I knew I wanted corduroy. So when we were trying to get in contact with wholesalers and vintage suppliers, we were looking technically for vintage corduroy. But then other times you find a gem and you let that lead the design process. So I think that maybe we are like me and my team are used to being maybe agile through the process, letting things spark ideas without being too rigid in the first place. And then I guess that really the key thing is that I'm really trying to think about it being design led and desirable, because I want people to want to buy these garments and then cherish them. I would love it if someone bought a jumper and they wore it 50 years later, or they've given it to their friend, or I think that to enable the life of a garment to be long, it's got to be really desirable. So that I think that it's a mixture of letting sometimes the process take you somewhere, and then also really thinking that I want this to be desirable and because upcycling can sometimes have bad connotations, I think, or seem a bit crafty, and that we're basically doing the opposite of that, I think.
Makes sense. Mike, what is if you had 15 seconds to say what you think the key takeaway should be for a designer considering the tech space in sustainability, do you have something top of mind?
I'd say 1, the technology is there. 2, if you're going to adopt technology, the go big or go home approach would not be the way I would go. Think about it as a learning process. Think about it as adoption taking time. So be patient, but be willing to take the risk.
Priya, same question for you. 15 seconds. What should someone take away from this experience?
Oh God, I feel I'm going to say the same thing as Mike, really. I think that don't be scared of technology, but I think that also for young designers, in reality, it's all about networking, and as we said earlier, reaching out to people that can give you access to technology, because sometimes it's hard. So I think it's about chatting to people in your network and thinking about ways you can do stuff on a small scale before maybe you reach out to bigger collaborators. But yeah, to keep the conversation going, and I think that really helps.
Excellent. Well, listen, I'd like to close this session where we started by talking about the entrenched linear model that the fashion industry is currently in, which is ironic because the creative and design process is anything but linear. And that's a metaphor that also applies to sustainability. So there is no one size fits all approach or A to B to sustainable. That doesn't exist. I think the recommendation here is for designers and brands alike to find a starting place that is authentic to them and then evolve from there, whether we're talking about technology or we're talking about something else. I would be remiss if I did not also mention that you can find out more information about both Priya and Avery Dennison on the Design Studio at globalfashionagenda.com, see 3D renderings, see more stories, more videos, all catered towards a creative audience. And with that, thank you both. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining us today at CFS Plus.
Thank you. Be well.
Take care.